Hey, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the No Rules, Just Vibes podcast. I am so glad to have y'all tune in this week. If you tuned in last week, then you know we talked about being overwhelmed. So, as we were parsing out those things that make us feel overwhelmed, I kind of realized that a lot of those things that have us stressed out and overwhelmed and just overextending ourselves is the fact that we haven't created healthy boundaries. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And I have a very, very special guest here with me to drop some gems for y'all. And it is my mother. Her name is Cynthia. And I'm going to give her just a quick little minute to introduce herself and we'll get started. So go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia, like Maya said, Cynthia Moore, and I am just so honored to be on the show today. I am excited. So, let's just talk.
She's literally just as silly as I am, y'all. So it'll be a fun show. Um, okay, so let's talk about creating boundaries because my position is that your boundaries cannot be based on other people's feelings. And I feel like that when you're creating boundaries, you can't be concerned with how other people are going to look at you, what other people are going to say. You have to be direct. You have to be in full control of your boundaries. You can't create your boundaries with other people's feelings in mind. So when I say that, I mean, for example, so say if we don't drink, we drinking is not our thing, but we hang around people or we're out with people that like to drink. And out of fear of being perceived as the person that's lame or doesn't like to have any fun, or is not loosened up, or it's just like a party pooper, we indulge and we start drinking because we care about what other people think. So that's what I mean by we can't compromise our boundaries out of fear of what people think. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that? How do you feel, just your general position on boundaries?
Well, when setting boundaries, I feel that, it has to be all about you.
Yeah.
How you feel, what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy, what is going to help you be a better you. So when setting your boundaries, I just think that we should take in consideration the things that are going to make us happy, the things that are going to make us stay focused. So when we're setting our boundaries, we shouldn't have other people in mind, so to say. It should all be all about who we are, what we think, what we need, what is going to make me happy, what is going to keep me focused. So you have to be very intentional when setting boundaries.
So you pretty much agree with what my position is on it. Like,
I
it's
do. Yeah,
okay.
I do.
So when we're talking about, creating your boundaries and it being all about you, I think one thing we have to remember is that, creating boundaries is not selfish. It's a form of self-care. So I guess with that in mind, what do you think, or just your experience, what have you seen happen when we don't create boundaries, or we compromise on our boundaries? Just, what are your thoughts on that, or just what have you experienced?
When we don't set boundaries, Maya, then we just open ourselves up to anything and anybody. Uh, so many times you're taken advantage of. So many times you're doing things that you really don't want to do, and we allow people to invade, in our space. And sometimes when people come in our space, they stay longer than we would allow them to stay. They create situations that we really didn't want to, be involved in. So when we set our boundaries, we have to really make sure that they're healthy boundaries. We have to make sure that we're understanding that boundaries they're necessary.
Right.
A lot of times we don't really set boundaries. It's just like, I just be everything to everybody, do what I can and how I can, and then we become burnt out, depressed, stressed out because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. But it's not about hurting people's feelings, it's about making sure that we're healthy.
So, I'm gonna go there. so
Come
like
on.
so like one of the things that I've noticed, especially with like me and some of my friends and being a Christian, and when it comes to relationships, there are certain values that we have in place, or just certain things, that certain limits, I'll say, that we have in place. And what are your thoughts on having those, or just being confident enough to stick to those boundaries and stick to those limits, even when that may not be the norm? Or just sometimes when you compromise on your boundaries, especially in relationships, just are you prepared to deal with guilt, regret, or just some of those emotions that may come from, like you said, doing some things that you may not have initially wanted to do?
Okay, you asked for it.
I mean, look.
You know, I'm old school.
Period. Period. I mean, I want to know.
Well, when we set those boundaries as Christians, we just don't move. And I say that because, there's a thing called self-respect. And if you don't respect yourself, then others will not respect you. And then you give that pass to allow people not to respect you. So if I have a boundary and I set a boundary, and I refuse to move off of it, because these are the values, and these are the things that I just refuse to compromise on. So in dating, for example, okay, just say, you're dating, and this young man, he wants to just spend a lot of time with you. Well, the boundary is, I like you, but I need some me time. And if I compromise on me time, on my time, I'm spending time with myself, making sure I'm healthy, making sure I'm enjoying me, and making sure, I'm taking care of me. If I compromise on that now, then later, guess what? You don't get that because you
Right.
compromised on that. So sometimes when we set our boundaries, we set them knowing that, you know what, I understand, we can have a conversation about it, but this is something that I refuse, or I don't want to negotiate on. I'm not going to compromise on these values. So sometimes you have to stand your ground and make sure that you're caring for yourself, and the things that you've been raised on, those are values. Those are things that you refuse to compromise on, and we're not going to negotiate. And so we can have conversation and we can talk about it, but I refuse to just negotiate on some things that are very important to me.
So, okay, if we're talking about and I guess I'll stay on the dating topic, people that are abstinent and celibate, and I think sometimes they have those boundaries, or we have those boundaries, but we have to be careful about preventing our boundaries to be tested too, because like you said, if somebody wants to spend a lot of time with you, and you have certain boundaries in place, then you may not need to be doing like some late night calls or pulling up at 11 o'clock at night, because you're just putting yourself in a more compromising position, usually, for your boundaries to be tested. So, and it's not even just in relationships, but I think sometimes just in general, if you carry yourself a certain way, or you allow yourself to be all accessible all the time, or you're going places with people that you don't necessarily need to be with, or you're in places where you necessarily don't need to be at, because certain things are happening that are not necessarily in line with your values or your boundaries. I think sometimes, you have good intentions and your heart is good and you have boundaries in place. You know your limits, you're self-aware, but I don't think it's healthy to continuously put yourself in positions for your boundaries to be tested. So I guess, how do you feel on that?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, because sometimes, you know, you'll fall, you know, sometimes you'll compromise, and it's because you're in that situation. So when you set the boundaries, that's why we set them, so that we won't allow ourselves to get in those situations. So, you know, if I just say I'm dating, I am not married, but this person wants to go on a trip, you know. So my boundary would be that, I don't. And it's not because I don't like you, I don't want to be with you, but I don't even want to put myself in that position where I have to choose whether I stay in the hotel with you and what we're going to be doing, at this time, and just trying to make plans. So what I do, I just refrain from even putting myself in those situations, so I don't have to try to juggle and try to make you feel a certain way. Look, let's just go walk in the park, or let's just go to dinner or to a movie here in the States and not travel out of town. So,
Child. Who ain't finna go travel? What is you talking about? Girl,
look,
hold on.
no. We don't put ourselves in those situations. We don't put ourselves in those situations. I'm telling you. Pay now, pay later.
Hold on, Ma. Hold on. Cole, stop the press. Stop the press. So, what? Hey, wait. Let's not necessarily just say no to not going completely. What about, I can even understand maybe getting separate rooms, or maybe going on a group trip or something like that. Is that okay? Because I likes to go, and if you're talking about don't be going on no trips. I feel like is there not like other ways that you could be preventative and set the tone for your boundaries and still enjoy yourself?
Yeah, you have to know the person. You have to know the person and the person that you're with. So if you're gonna be with an individual, they touchy, they're real, want to be all cuddly and all that kind of good stuff. No, you need accountability partner. You need somebody that you're gonna be hanging with, somebody else in the group. And you just can't put yourself in those situations. And I know it's 2021, and you guys probably saying, no. But listen, I am telling you, there is a thing that is called self-respect. And if you don't respect yourself, nobody else will.
So
And it's a way. It's a way. According to the word, I have to go there. It's a way. And the Bible says,
come on, preacher.
who find him to him who finds a wife findeth a good thing. It's not to her, it's to him. So, we have to just make sure that, we're doing what we're supposed to do.
Okay, so I guess let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about, some of those boundaries when it comes to just like your personal boundaries, because I think sometimes we overlook that. I don't know if that's the right word, but we don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to that. I know for me, I've noticed, especially, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, just having limits when it comes to social media, the things that I watch on TV, the type of music that I listen to, the type of conversations that I have with certain people, who I talk to, who I allow to have access to me, because I noticed that, I sometimes when I indulge in certain things that, it has an effect on me spiritually, emotionally, physically. Sometimes you can become drained or frustrated or sad, or just feel the weight of somebody else's burdens. And sometimes I think when you're creating boundaries, they're not necessarily to shield other people, but sometimes they're to protect you, because how you respond to certain things, or you just know your triggers. And so I guess, do you have any thoughts on that, or just what do you think? Because I think sometimes we create boundaries with other people in mind. Like, we have our personal limits, but we create boundaries to say, I'm not going to let this person have this, or I'm not going to do this with this person, I'm not going to allow this person. But it's like, what about those personal boundaries when it's just you, or just some things that you're dealing with, that you're trying to help grow in certain areas? Just what are some things that you can do?
Oh my God, this is so good, Maya. We are what we take in, whether it be, what we eat, what we see, what we hear, everything that we take in, that's who we are. So we have to set boundaries. So we have to be careful with the things that we see, what we see when we watch TV, and the things that we hear and how we react to social media and all those things that we're allowing to go into these gates, our eye gate, hear gate, everything that we take in, we become, or we're creating that individual. So just say, if everything that I hear is always, just negative, it's just always evil and bad, guess what? That's who I'll become, because that's the only thing I'm taking in. So we have to be extremely careful. And I would say that that is probably one of the most important boundaries, or some of the most important boundaries that we need to set, and set them immediately. Because if we're going to be developing ourselves, or we're going to be who God has called us to be, then we have to be very, very intentional about staying focused, about what we see, what we allow our eyes to see, what we allow our ears to hear, and even what we intake into our bodies. We have to be very intentional. So I really, really, focus on that, because I know if I continue to just hear all this negative, before I know it, then that's what I'm speaking, and that's how I'm reacting. So that one is a really good one, Maya. We have to be very mindful and intentional about what we allow to come into our space.
Okay, so if somebody is listening to this and they may not necessarily know their limits, know, their boundaries, and they're wanting to start creating boundaries, I guess what are some good areas to start in your opinion?
Say, just I would start with just me, you know, knowing who I am, just figuring out, okay, what what makes me happy and what makes me unhappy. So it's almost like self-development. Just say, when I hear bad news, and I become extremely sad. So you know what? I want to set up a boundary to make sure that everything that I'm hearing and everything that I'm focusing on is, positive. So because when I hear these positive things, and I'm upbeat, I'm better, I feel better, and now I have something in place. Okay, I won't watch the news. Okay, I won't do a whole lot of time on social media. If I have a friend, and every time I call this friend, is always doom and gloom, I refuse. Okay, I'm not going to talk to this person as much, or even at all. I might have to just cut the relationship. You never know. But I have to do whatever I need to do to make sure there is a good and healthy me. Focus more on me. That's a start. I would just focus on, you know, just realizing, because before you can even set boundaries, you need to know who you are. And believe it or not, there are people that really don't know who they are.
Right. That's good. And I think, yeah, you can't set boundaries if you're not self-aware. I
Right.
mean, that's going to be
Exactly.
extremely hard for you to do, and especially if you don't know, like you said, who you are, but you don't know your limits, and you just kind of go with the flow. Like everybody can dictate, the things that you do, or you're, I don't want to use the word follower, but it's more so that you just kind of go with the flow. You just
Yeah.
kind of go with the wind. You're this person when you're around these type of people, and you're that person when you're around those type of people. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. And I think until you just take a step back and you realize, like you said, you know what are the things that when I do these things, or when I participate in certain things, I feel at my best. I feel my most alive. I feel my healthiest. I feel my closest to God. I feel myself being closer to God. What are those things when I'm doing them, I'm at my peak. And then, you start there, and then you just kind of slowly but surely, because it's a process. You don't know these things in a day. Sometimes you need certain experience to happen to know, okay, that's not happening again. I'm not talking to that person anymore. Okay, my next relationship, that's what we're not going to do. We're going to go ahead and, start, I guess, set the tone at the beginning. I may have been in a abusive relationship, verbal abusive, physical abusive, emotional abusive relationship in the past, and I may have participated in that, or I may have just compromised some values, or whatever the case may be, and gotten out of it. Now I know the first sign of you even thinking about calling me out my name, that's a wrap. Like, we're not doing that, and I think, sometimes we have to, like I said, no, it's more about knowing who you are and knowing your limits. But I think you also have to realize that, it doesn't happen in a day. It takes time, and you have to be wise and observant and pay attention to things that change your mood, change your diet. You'll be surprised, what those things that happen, experiences and life experience that happen. Now all of a sudden you're overeating, or you're not eating at all. You have to be careful, and you have to recognize those things as they happen, so that, okay, going forward, I can't allow, myself to be exposed to this. I can't allow myself to participate in this. So it's a process.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to have the conversation. You can't be afraid to have the conversations. This is, I love me enough to let you know what I will not and what I will allow to come into my life, come into my space. You know, we just don't call each other out of our names. That's just absolutely, no, it's unacceptable. And we will not. We do not. Period, as you say. Yeah.
Period. But I think that's an interesting point, because I think a lot of the times when you're creating boundaries, it's normal to think, okay, or just be a little bit fearful. And I know I started out with that, but I think it is kind of normal to be a little bit fearful as to, or just be a little bit concerned. I'm not gonna say fearful, as to how someone may react to your boundary, because it may not be their boundary. They may have different limits or different boundaries. So it may not necessarily be their boundary, but I think it's important that to know that when you have a conversation with someone and you're sharing your boundaries, oh God, I'm getting choked. When you have a conversation with someone and you're sharing your boundaries, I think it's important to realize that the people that are on your team and in your corner and want to see the best for you won't be offended by your boundaries.
Exactly.
They won't be scared of your boundaries. It won't push them away. The people who want to test your boundaries and or just don't care that you're prioritizing your boundaries, or just don't mind testing your boundaries, they're the ones that are going to give you pushback on those boundaries, and they're the ones that are going to make you feel less than for having those boundaries, or make you feel isolated, or like something's wrong with you for having those boundaries. And those are people that, thank you, but no thank you. Those people may not be the people that you need in your life.
Right. Yeah. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't set boundaries.
Yeah.
And when we don't, then a lot comes with do not setting when we don't set boundaries. Depression, stress, just overworked and just feeling alone. But when we set boundaries, they respect your boundaries. And if you're a good friend, you'll help your friend also set boundaries. If I'm in a relationship and I'm discussing, okay, there's some things that, I just want to discuss. There's some things that I just need to talk about before we can go any further, whether it's a relationship with the opposite sex, if a friendship, a co-worker, whomever, these are my boundaries. There's some things that I just don't, allow to come into my space. And when you do that, then you talk to that individual and help them just find out who they are and what do they like and what they do not like, and help them set boundaries as well. A lot of times This is just something that we're not used to. If you were told to do it, you do it, and just do what I tell you to do, and that's just it. And in order for people to like you, you just wanted to please everybody, and whether it was wearing you down, stressing you out, you just want to be everything to everybody. And no, no. And it's okay to say no, no, I'm sorry, but no, not at this time.
Period. So, I guess my last thing, because I didn't want this to be too long. I wanted to know or just point out that, we're talking about creating boundaries and you have your boundaries, but I think I always like to play devil's advocate, and I have to do my best to try to see things from both sides. I
Okay.
think you also have to be open and be willing to respect other people's boundaries. So you have your boundaries, but now you can't, feel a certain type of way about other people's boundaries. So if we talk a lot of times from women's point of views, because we're women, and when we're talking about relationships, so I know my perspectives can sometimes be warped, but I think for guys out there, they have boundaries and they have things that they're not willing to do, or they're not willing to compromise when they're in a relationship. And I think women have to also respect those boundaries. So if he's at work and either he has like gym time or free time, and he's already expressed to you that he likes to have that time by himself, he doesn't want you blowing his phone up or calling him and everything like that, especially if you guys have built that trust and things like that. You can't become this overbearing, jealous, insecure person, and that you're calling him repeatedly and he can't get that free time or just focus focus on his work and things that he needs to do and be his individual self. You have to respect his boundaries too. And I think sometimes that's a hard conversation for my ladies. So and it's not just in relationships, but I'm just talking about in general. I think it's easy to create boundaries, but it's not necessarily easy to respect other people's boundaries. So I guess, what are your thoughts?
I agree, Maya, but I look at it like this. If you are an individual and you have boundaries, then it's a little easier to respect other people's boundaries because you know how important they are to you. You
But
know,
what
you
if, okay, hold on, because I don't mean to cut you off. What if you don't necessarily agree with that person's boundaries? Because I don't think it's easier. I think it's easier to create your own boundaries versus respecting others people's boundaries. But I think it's more so in the context of, what if you don't necessarily agree with that person's boundaries, or you don't feel like that should be a boundary, or you feel like that boundary is not it's like, girl, that ain't you just being over the top. Like, that's not even a real thing. So if you don't necessarily respect or just hold the same weight, or I don't even know the word I'm looking for, but if you don't their boundaries are just not as important to you. So if I have a value on something that may not necessarily be, you have values about it, but it may not necessarily be at the top of your list. I may not necessarily prioritize your value, even though that's a high thing on my list. I think sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to respect somebody else's boundaries when you don't necessarily agree, or it's just not something that you prioritize.
that's why communication is extremely important because guess what, sweetheart? You don't get to say what you like and what you don't like.
I know that's right.
So, I mean, let's talk about it. And I know you may not like, but guess what? You don't get to say, if you want to be my friend, if you want to stay in a relationship with me, even with family members, if we want to stay, close, and you feel like the relationship is worth it, then you don't get to say what you like and what you don't like about what I like. Because guess what? This is what's going to make me healthy, and this is what's going to make the relationship healthy. So if I have to keep coming back and we keep having the same conversation over and over, that's not good because we have to respect others' opinions, and we have to respect others' boundaries. Anything that a person feel like, hey, this is what's going to make me better. You just have to respect that.
Yeah.
Point blank.
You're right. You're right. Well,
And I know sometimes we want to have say so, but we don't get to. We don't get to. No, you don't.
okay. So, I think that's a healthy place to stop. I think we covered some good things about boundaries, but just kind of to reiterate for those of y'all that are listening, and even me, I'm still working on my boundaries. Like she said, Cynthia, my mom, like she said, a good place to start is yourself, and just becoming more self-aware, just paying attention to those things that make you tick, the things that make you upset, things that stress you out, when you're becoming overwhelmed, why you're becoming overwhelmed, just start really paying attention to those things so that you can start doing the work to create those boundaries so that you can be healthy. Because like she said, when you're healthy for everybody around you. It makes, especially if you're in a relationship, you have to be healthy, so that the relationship can be healthy. The relationship is not going to be healthy if you're not healthy. So, it's definitely important for you to take care of yourself. And like I said, creating boundaries is not selfish. It's a form of self-care. So it's definitely important and something that we all need to focus on, especially it's still the beginning of 2021. So it's a great time to just really, really pay attention to those things as we maneuver out the rest of this year. And I guess with that being said, do you have any encouraging words? I'd like to give people a chance to just say something positive or motivating or encouraging or inspirational. Just something before we go so that we can leave on a positive note. So if you have anything that you want to leave the people with.
Well, I just want to say, communication is the key. As long as we can communicate, you can't ever over communicate, and we want to always communicate. We always want to talk about it and have discussions because, nobody is going to care for you like you care for yourself. And we don't want to be selfish but we do want to be healthy. And I just want to say, in closing, that nobody's going to love you like you. So, in order to take care of yourself, then you have to know who you are. And to know who you are, you have to know what, like you said, what ticks you off and what makes you happy and what makes you act and say the things that you do. And then you set your boundaries and say, hey, in order for me to be who especially God wants me to be, I need to, be in this space, be in this place. So my whole thing is, especially if you're in a relationship, just make sure that you over communicate.
And there y'all have it. This is this is this week's episode, and I'm so glad that y'all tuned in. I just want to remind y'all to make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. So other people can find the show. And if you're not following us on Instagram, make sure you do that. I'll be sharing some fun stuff there that I don't want you guys to miss. So if you're not following us on Instagram, make sure you do that at No Rules Just Vibes Pod. And thank you so much, Mama, for being on the show. I definitely appreciate it. And I will see you guys next week.